Let me give you another example of this, if you don't mind. I'm going to use another biblical story.
While you were biblicaling, the lights are flickering behind you, almost like God is interacting with us. There's spirits in the room, Jamie. Have you noticed the light flickering? If you haven't noticed it, keep an eye on it.
Hopefully they're the right spirits.
Well, I think they always are.
Abraham is he's an old man when the story starts.
As soon as you start talking about Abraham, start flickering again. It's going now,
It's one of my tricks, man.
I'm telling you, dude, It's never happened before. This is wild.
So Abraham is like 70 years old. We're freeing the children. It's like, no, I don't think so. Oh, my son, he's so confused. He thinks he's a girl, but I still love him. That's how wonderful I am.
The last couple of weeks have been pretty controversial for Joe Rogan. A lot of his listeners aren't happy. Since the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, everyone's been waiting for him to have Alex Jones on the show or even Eddie Bravo. Basically, anyone who can come on there and entertain the various conspiracy theories about the shooting. At this point, people would even be happy to see Joe's CIA handler, Mike Baker, come on the podcast to tell us all what to think about the whole situation. There's even a theory that Mike Baker told Joe to play it cool and stop talking about it. So instead, Joe's had a few stand-up comedians on, a singer, and Francis Ngannou for the latest MMA show, none of which have reached 1 million views. And Rogan's refusal to have more controversial guests on the show like he used to is starting to affect his numbers to the point that Tucker Carlson just dethroned JRE as the #1 podcast on Spotify. Sure, Rogan's back on YouTube now, so that's going to have an impact, but so is Tucker. It's not like Tucker Carlson has an exclusive arrangement with Spotify or anything. So I think it's safe to say Joe fumbled the aftermath of the Trump shooting by not having a dedicated episode, or at least address it in more detail than he did last week, which I covered in a previous video. But today, finally, Joe had his first decent guest on in a while. Jordan Peterson made his 9th appearance on the podcast, which I thought could have been the episode we were all waiting for, except as it turns out, Jordan was only there to promote his new book called We Who Wrestle with God and his new online university, the Peterson Academy. They didn't discuss any current issues and they didn't mention the Trump shooting once, but it wasn't all bad news because within the first 30 minutes, Joe went on an unhinged rant about psychedelics. Rogan definitely looked like he was on something. I don't know if he snorted a bottle of Alpha Brain or he dumped a few Addies before Jamie hit the record button. Whatever it was, it had him choking up over classic cars from the 60s.
Like, I'm a gigantic fan of 1960s automobiles. I love them. There's something about the shapes of them, the way they sound. There's something about those shapes. There's something about the designs of those cars that resonates so strongly today. A 1990 car ain't worth psychedelic inspired 100%. 100%.
The funniest thing about this was that Jordan just came off an interview with Elon Musk, which was awkward as fuck because Jordan kept interrupting and talking over Elon. Whatever you think about him, Jordan's always had a big ego and loves the sound of his own voice. But when you pair him up with someone like Elon, who's one of the most awkward dudes on the planet, it makes for some really interesting conversation.
Caused some back and shoulder injuries was me foolishly fighting the world champion sumo wrestler and charging him at full speed to knock him over, which I did succeed in doing, but
you paid a price for it.
A very, very high price.
Carnivore diet will fix that.
The what, sorry?
The carnivore diet will fix that.
Look, I like meat. I'm pro meat. I don't think a carnivore diet is going to fix this particular issue. I think
my wife had an injury of 40 years, and it resolved in 2 years on a carnivore diet.
If you just eat steak or something?
Yeah. I mean, all beef.
Sure. I'm a pro. I like meat, but I think this is I think I'll probably need an operation or something. But anyway,
I'd try the carnivore diet first.
Sure.
Anyways, that did happen to her. Okay. She couldn't lift her left arm above here.
Oh, that's great. As if Elon's not awkward enough as he is. So it looks like JP clearly got the message from all the backlash he got after that interview, because once he saw Rogan was gearing up for one of his epic rants, he just sat there and listened in silence. At one point though, about halfway through Rogan's 20-minute dissertation on the quirks and features of taking psychedelics, Jordan attempted to jump in and end Rogan's seemingly never-ending rant, but Joe just steamrolled him and kept pushing through like a bear in heat.
And there's something about throwing water on that in the 1970s, because it's equated these things with people that have poor discipline and bad social skills and ne'er-do-wells who fail in society, and that's not true. And all these people that I know that are billionaires, I know people that are like super rich people, like brilliant venture capitalist guys and brilliant tech guys, and almost all of them are enthusiasts. Almost all of them have had these experiences, and they're all kind of quiet about it. And it's very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate.
Rogan was committed to hitting all his psychedelic talking points. It was honestly impressive how he was able to just throw everything together on the spot like that, straight after JP asked him about the impact psychedelics have had on his life. I mean, he had to know that asking Joe a question like that was going to derail the whole podcast and lead him down a rabbit hole. Basically, Rogan believes psychedelics are the solution to solving all the world's problems. It reminded me of that time when he was discussing the homelessness issue and then randomly threw in that psychedelics would have to be part of the solution.
The amount of money that it costs to have massive populations of homeless people is extraordinary. If they just put the same amount or maybe more to prepare for the future into some sort of like comprehensive program to try to help people that are fucked up like that and clean them up. And it would probably have to involve psychedelic drugs.
Yeah, it's not a cure. It's not a financial cure. It's these people.
People
it's
that
their
are
mindset.
just so...
But this time around, it all started with JP's new book called We Who Wrestle with God. It's his 4th book, and it's on one of his favorite topics. He's always talking about how biblical stories offer profound wisdom for the troubled times we find ourselves in. And so he was talking about how Abraham offered his son to God as a sacrifice, and he was emphasizing the idea of how we need to make sacrifices in our lives to pursue adventure and create our own character arcs. But Rogan was having none of it. As soon as Jordan got onto Moses, Joe turned the conversation around and walked straight into the burning bush head on.
Are you aware of some of the more recent work that's been done by scholars in Israel, where these guys have now come up with this hypothesis that the burning bush was actually, it was a DMT experience. And that the burning bush was most likely an acacia tree, that the acacia tree is apparently rich with DMT, and they think, you know, the way you get a DMT experience is you smoke it, right? And this is where Moses is encountering God.
Well, we have one of the
things...
Have
you read any of that stuff?
I know about the theorizing, and
Yeah.
it's certainly the case that people have been using psychedelic experiences for we don't know how long.
So we know how much Joe loves a good pseudo-scientific theory. Only recently we saw how Terrence Howard convinced him that he was a genius and that 1 + 1 = 2.
I understand it, though.
I kind of
I
understand
understand it. I understand.
I mean, it made sense.
To me, he's making me
sense.
believe.
This time around, though, Rogan went balls deep on the stoned ape theory, which is something that he's believed in for years, ever since he read Terence McKenna's theory. Basically, Terence speculated that the consumption of psychoactive mushrooms played a crucial role in the evolution of human consciousness and the development of language, culture, and religion. And Rogan's discussed this with various guests over the years because, unfortunately, Terence died back in the year 2000 from brain cancer at the age of 53. So he never had the opportunity to have him on JRE and talk about all his theories, although he has had his brother Dennis on the podcast, who was also involved in coming up with the stoned ape theory. But as much as Joe has tried to push this theory and help it gain traction, it's never really taken off within the mainstream scientific community, due in part because it's almost impossible to prove using the scientific method.
Terence and Dennis both came up with a stoned ape theory. Now, it's not a theory, it's a hypothesis. A hypothesis is speculative, but cannot necessarily be as not yet proven. A theory is a hypothesis that has been tested and proven with facts. So I disagree with them in saying it's not a theory, it's a hypothesis. Even though we may not be able to prove it, I ask people to suspend their disbelief for a second. Now think of this. Our primate ancestors are going across the savannah. They ingest these mushrooms as a clan. Huge amounts of data is coming in. Fractal patterns, geometrical, landscapes occur. You have empathy. You have greater courage. If you're the leader of that clan and you can overcome your fear response, you have courage and you have empathy. Those are leadership skills. I think people should take note of it. People like to follow leaders who are courageous and yet kind. I think it's a very good explanation. It's an unprovable hypothesis.
How much did you pay attention to McKenna's theory about the evolution of the human brain, of the stoned ape theory?
Yeah, I looked at it.
But I didn't find it persuasive. And in fact, if you press Terence McKenna, he didn't find it entirely persuasive. It was an interesting speculation. It's kind of a mind game. He said it changed us at the genetic level. I see psychedelics as having had a profound effect at the level of cultural evolution, that there are lots of interesting innovations that people who had psychedelic experience introduced to our culture. We talked about religion earlier. That could be one. And I think there are hundreds of them. I mean, Steve Jobs talked about, his use of LSD is very important to his formative experience. And in fact, there's a whole tradition of computer engineers going back to the 50s using LSD that I wrote about in the book. So, but I don't see how we were selected genetically because of there was an advantage to the people who were taking a lot of psychedelics.
And so even though the stoned ape theory is widely accepted to be a speculative idea and one without evidence or any grounding in scientific proof, Rogan really believes that it explains why we were able to double our brain size in such a short span of time relative to the duration of our known existence. He even thinks it should be mandated in some way by the government to decrease crime rates and improve poverty. I mean, the way he was talking about it to Jordan Peterson was one of the most impassioned and emotional rants I've seen him give on his podcast in a while. Some would call it Unhinged. It was almost as good as the time he thought that those two YouTuber boxers were actually father and son, and he was worried that the father had potentially given the son brain damage until Jamie corrected him. So when Jordan gave him the opportunity to discuss psychedelics, Rogan gave him the full history on the stoned ape theory and why we're still living blindly by not accepting it into the mainstream.
I think we're in a weird place in society where the term drug is a blanket, and it covers things that have vastly different effects. And the idea that psychedelics are a drug, for lack of a better term, that's what we use. I don't think that's what they are at all. I think they are probably why we became people. I think they are probably why society advanced. And I think every great ancient culture probably celebrated them and used them. Understanding that that's possible, the world changes. Because now you know that that's possible. You could live your whole life and not know that the most shocking, profound thing in existence is 3 hits away. 3 hits away. And all of a sudden, you're in a completely different universe in 20, 30 seconds. That's nuts. People look at it as like, oh, you're just escaping reality, and you're like, it might be the source of civilization itself. It might be the source of language. It might be the source of the expansion of the human mind over a period of 2 million years, the doubling of the human brain over a period of 2 million years. These ungulate cows that were everywhere that would shit, and then these psilocybin mushrooms would grow in their shit. Observed primates flipping over these cow patties. If there's something on that, they're going to try it out. And if these things are trying it out and they're doing this over a period of 2 million years, and they develop language and culture and weapons, and they start thinking about things, and they become different than every animal around them. And this was McKenna's stoned ape theory, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I've noticed lately that Rogan seems to be talking more and more during episodes. I'm not sure if that's a coincidence or he's actively trying to talk more because he's known for being a really good interviewer and letting his guests speak. But over the last couple of weeks, especially when he's had comedians on the show, I did a rough estimate and it looked like he was talking for around 70 to 80% of the time, which is odd seeing as it's a guest-driven podcast. So I'm not sure if Joe's purposely having on lower profile guests so he can talk more, or he's just trying to pad the episodes with conversation to make it to the 2-hour mark. I also suspect that he's purposely refusing to have on guests to talk about recent events. I heard him say the other day that he never books guests in to fish for viral moments or to jump on the latest trends, except we've seen him do that multiple times in the past. I actually think he's trying to prove a point and clean up his image, especially after Terrence Howard embarrassed him and ended up looking like a bumbling fool. The more I think about it, the more it felt like he took advantage of somebody with a mental illness to get views. And now that his comedy club is doing so well and selling out all the time, he's made it clear that he wants to focus on building up the Austin comedy scene and cement his legacy as a comedy gatekeeper who helped nurture young comics and boost their profiles by hosting them at his club and on his podcast. So I don't think it's just a coincidence or bad programming recently. I think he's really trying to send a message that he does whatever he wants and nobody's pulling his strings. But as for Jordan Peterson, he's been having a rough time recently as well. Too Lazy recently covered his antics on Twitter, how he engages with the trolls and gets into arguments with randoms on Twitter for no reason, and being a victim of online hate and the targeted efforts to cancel him have become his bread and butter. I mean, it's half the reason he blew up in the first place. Wherever he's being interviewed, he'll always find a way to bring up how much hate he gets and how tough it is for him being a public figure.
Well, and so one thing to know is that if there's a dragon, there's a treasure somewhere. Really?
Right.
Really?
Right.
You know, my family and I have really learned this in the last 6 years because we were subject to continued and assaults in the public sphere that were designed to be deadly. There's a kind of a process, because you're exposed to that, and then there's an intermediary period where it looks like it might succeed. Mm-hmm. And that's very stressful.
Right.
That's usually when people come out with their apologies.
Right.
Because they're just terrified. They're going to lose. Well, I did lose my job, and I lost my clinical practice.
Right.
Right. So, like, the costs are real.
And like I was just saying, at this point, Jordan's whole brand is being a warrior on the front lines of the culture wars. That's part of the reason why I stopped following him as closely as I used to. I remember back when he first blew up back in 2016 for refusing to comply with Canada's Bill C-16 when he was at the University of Toronto. Those new laws added gender identity or expression as a prohibited ground of discrimination under the Canadian Human Rights Act. And so after that, he became a public figure in the debates over transgender rights, especially when it comes to children transitioning. He's also still involved in a long and drawn-out lawsuit with the Psychology Board in Canada because he's been so outspoken on issues like global warming and the Canadian government's overreach, which has cost him over $1 million in legal fees so far.
So your situation in Canada was that they wanted you to sign up for re-education.
Oh no, that's already that's the plan.
Right.
I couldn't sign up. They said already that I have to do that.
Right.
But we have an appeal in at the moment that's blocking it, and so that's cost me about $1 million in legal fees so far. So it's a very hard battle to fight. It's very annoying because the accusations continue to flow in, even though that's a choice of the college. And I've already been sentenced to re-education of indefinite duration, right, till they're satisfied that I've learned whatever the hell lesson I'm supposed to learn. So that the only reason that isn't happening is because we now have an appeal in front of the Supreme Court in Canada.
So he's become a cult hero for some people for his refusal to comply and his willingness to fight back against the establishment. And for him, apart from fighting for his personal beliefs, being a cultural warrior also pays really well.
Are you a father figure?
Sometimes.
A prophet, in a way? A guru?
I don't believe that I'm a guru.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that you can be a guru and tell people to take their own way. You know, I'm asking people to develop a vision for their own lives and to adopt the responsibility for that, but it has to be something that's personal.
But do you feel responsibility then?
Yes, absolutely. Fundamentally, this is supposed to be helpful to people.
What if I told you that you're playing on young men's distress to make all that money?
That accusation has been leveled at me before. I don't know how I'm playing on their distress, exploiting it or helping it.
The fact
Look,
is,
I've said right from the beginning that I'm an evil capitalist. I don't make any bones about it. I'm not ashamed of making money. It's very hard to make money.
Can I ask you bluntly how much you make?
I make $80,000 a month on Patreon. My book is selling about 20,000 copies a week. I have royalties that probably amount to something approximating $1.50 on each of those. The tours garner about $35,000 to $50,000 an evening. I have a business that's generating, I don't know, something in the neighborhood of $200,000 a month for me personally. There's some other smaller sources of income than that.
Then You are making a lot of money
Yes,
out of this.
I certainly am. And so are a lot of other people.
So if you add all of that up, he's probably clearing around $400,000 to $500,000 a month, which is wild. But at least he's open and honest about it. That interview was from a while ago, and he's since joined the Daily Wire, which was a massively controversial move because he's basically thrown away any degree of independence that he had before. People have accused him of changing his stance on various political issues and becoming a mouthpiece for the Israeli government and Netanyahu. But from a legal perspective, his battle with the psychology board over in Canada is actually really interesting because they don't really have a way of cancelling him and forcing him to comply.
Is it important to you to maintain your license, or is it important to you to win this?
It's important. There's two things that are important to me, likely. One is I'm not going to let a pack of ideologically addled moralists, lying moralists who are facilitating the butchery and sterilization of children take away my license, not without a war. I'm in a prime position in Canada to undertake this battle against the woke licensing boards because I have the money, and what the hell are they going to do to me? I'm not practicing.
Right.
They can't take away my income. And likely they can't blacken my reputation. Really, there's nothing they can do to me.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. If you think about an average doctor or psychologist who's in a similar position, they would have been stripped of their ability to earn an income, so they'd basically be forced to comply or face bankruptcy. JP doesn't have to worry about that because he's got so much money coming in every month. But the problem for me is every conversation he has turns into a political battle and point-scoring contest. I miss the days where he would just talk about mental health and tell interesting stories. Now he fishes for controversy by saying the most outlandish shit he can think of.
I've studied atrocity for 40 years. I've never seen anything worse than what's happening right now. And that includes the sorts of things that were done in the camps in Germany. At least the goddamn Nazis admitted what they did was wrong. They tried to hide it. We trumpet it as a moral virtue. We're freeing the children. It's like, no, I don't think so, mothers. I think what you're doing is sacrificing your child to the parading of your moral virtue. Oh, my son, he's so confused. He thinks he's a girl, but I still love him. That's how wonderful I am. Jesus Christ, Joe.
Yeah, comparing trans mothers to the Holocaust is pretty wild, even for him. Those impressions were pretty funny, though. But he also went on the podcast to promote his new online university called the Peterson Academy, which coincidentally launched on the same day he was on JRE this week. And like I keep saying, everything he does is political and somehow reverts back to how he's the victim of an organized effort to cancel him. The launch video of his new academy had almost nothing to do with actually being a student and doing a course. It was all about the culture wars and how the universities have all tried to cancel him.
I've got other projects I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
All right?
Sure.
We're launching Peterson Academy today. We're launching with 20 courses. Best lectures in the world. Very, very high quality production. We invited the best lecturers I could find down to Miami. 8-hour courses on the topic they really want, highest possible production, high-level, university equivalent education available to everyone for approximately 1/20th the cost. Why did I decide to build an online university? Well,
there is a crisis now in higher education.
The president of Harvard University resigned today, weeks
Does
after
calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's code of conduct?
We have a problem of affordability and cost, spiraling student loans. We have a groupthink emerging, and that warps the entire academic enterprise.
I think it's funny because I got canceled at the university, so I could try to return the favor.
I think they're doing that to themselves, right?
Yeah, well, we couldn't have a better marketing campaign than the universities themselves.
So don't get me wrong, I used to be a massive fan of Jordan Peterson before he became a political player. It's hard to watch his stuff now because he seems so ideologically driven, and I'm not saying he's right or wrong, but when your whole brand is being a victim and constantly crying in interviews, promoting fad diets and living your whole life on Twitter, challenging everyone who disagrees with you and fishing for arguments, yeah, it gets kind of boring and predictable. Both him and Joe are full-blown memes now, so I still enjoyed the podcast for the entertainment value. It beats listening to a comedian I've never heard of laugh at Joe's shitty jokes and kiss the ring. But anyway, that's it from me for today. Remember to check out the link in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some of my uncensored content. The whole 3-part series on Tony Hinchcliffe and Kill Tony is up now, so go and check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, if you're not a regular of this channel yet, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to give me a thumbs up if you ended up enjoying this video. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.
It's a famous statue of Mary in St. Peter's in Rome. Michelangelo made it when he was like 23, some ridiculous early age.
There it is.
Yeah.
He was 23 when he made that? That is insane. Oh, God.
What were you doing when you were 23?
Telling shitty jokes.